It has been just over 2 weeks since the historic wildfires first engulfed large areas of Los Angeles County. And as we all remember, firefighters initially struggled to get a grip on the flames, with hurricane-force winds spreading them, yes, like wildfire. The disaster was a jolting beginning to 2025, and to many feels like an omen, because scientists around the world have already confirmed that last year was our planet's hottest on record. With warming global temperatures comes the strong likelihood of higher intensity and increasingly costly storms. And costly is the right word here, guys, because in 2024 alone, according to the government, there were 27 weather and climate disasters in the U.S. that caused more than $1 billion in damage each. For comparison, from 1980 to 2024, the average number of billion-dollar disasters each year was just 9. So we're comparing 9 to 27. And by the way, you might remember some of last year's most extreme climate events, from January's winter storm that slammed into the Northwest to the outbreak of tornadoes across several central and southern states in March, to 2024's most expensive disaster, Hurricane Helene, which pushed into Florida as a Category 4 storm in September before wreaking havoc on parts of Georgia and North Carolina that are not used to this kind of weather. Which brings us to today. If our changing climate is producing more powerful weather events, how can we and should we adapt?
What's it going to take? Joining us now to talk about all of it is our very own Jonathan Vigliotti, who's been on the ground covering a whole lot of natural disasters, including the recent fires in Los Angeles. He's also the author of a fantastic book. It's called Before It's Gone: Stories from the Front Lines of Climate Change in Small Town America. It is a breathtaking read, very eye-opening as well. Jonathan, good morning. The fires in Los Angeles, we should just start there because they're so vivid in people's minds. They were later in what we call the fire season than people expected. Is the fire season even relevant anymore, or how is climate change affecting drought and wind and how we think about what normal is?
Yeah, a great question, Tony. The past 10 years have been the warmest on record, according to NOAA. Climate change amplifying all of the weather conditions, making them more extreme, less predictable and volatile when they do hit. As you mentioned, this is not typical wildfire season. This is supposed to be the rainy season, but we haven't had significant rainfall since last May. Instead, we have drought-like conditions and incredible amounts of wind. The wind alerts that went into effect leading up to the LA fires, they are rare. According to the National Weather Service, on average, they're issued once every 3 to 5 years. We've had 5 of them issued in this region in just the past 3 months alone. Climate change providing all of the perfect ingredients for these perfect storms. And case in point, Adriana alluded to this. Last year, we were covering here in LA and throughout the region what are known as atmospheric rivers, incredible amounts of rainfall over a short period of time that leads to the rapid regrowth of vegetation. Then you had last summer, one of the hottest on records. It dried out all of that vegetation, creating the perfect fuel load for wildfires. The LA wildfire, not an isolated case. 9 of the 10 most destructive wildfires in U.S. history happening in the past 25 years. And now Gavin Newsom, the governor here, predicting that this disaster will go on to become the most costliest and destructive in U.S. history, even more so surpassing possibly the damage that we saw with Hurricane Katrina, Tony.
There's so many records being set. It's hard to keep track, Jonathan. Let's talk about the wind that you just mentioned. We had LA County Fire Chief on CBS Mornings Plus, and he said that no amount of fire engines could have controlled this fire because of the high wind. Is the wind being pushed by climate change? Because we associate climate change with drier conditions, but how does the wind play into this?
It is, and that's a great question. So climate change impacts every kind of weather event, whether it is rain, drought, and of course the wind. I spoke with the fire chief as well, Chief Maroney, because he did go on and he was on 60 Minutes, and he has since said this several times in interviews about how that 100-mile-per-hour wind was simply too difficult to fight in. As he later acknowledged, there were many hours leading up to that windstorm. It started off as about 23-mile-per-hour gusts early in the morning. There were more than 8 hours that went by before that wind picked up to 100 miles per hour. He told us that it's important for officials to be held accountable in their response to these events. Again, the warnings went out days in advance. There should have been pre-positioning in some of the most vulnerable hillsides. Instead, fire crews were pre-positioned in their fire stations. When the alerts went out, those emergency alerts on cell phones, it hampered the process. We're now learning many of them weren't effective. Many of them went out after the fact. You had people taking to the roads, leading to gridlock. So you had an entire system here meant to provide safety and security that was hampered for a number of reasons, many of them man-made, and simply not taking into account the weather warnings. Again, 100-mile-per-hour warnings went into effect days in advance. And of course, it carried out like a self-fulfilling prophecy when they did hit.
Jonathan, maybe the most politically realistic and practical response to fires like this is to rebuild your home in a way that is somehow more resilient to the climate we now live in. Based on your reporting, is that possible?
It is possible, but it requires state, local, federal leaders to come together and act as one. Rebuilding is going to require resiliency. Things like taking power lines, burying them underground, building defensible fire space around homes, specifically when we're talking about wildfires. What stood out to me when FEMA was interviewed on Margaret Brennan's show, Face the Nation, she said, and this is Deon Criswell, the administrator, that it's not up to the federal government to require power lines to be built underground. The governor, in several interviews, did not touch on whether that's going to be a mandate. I think moving forward, building underground is going to be critical with lines to prevent wildfires, and of course, sustainability and resiliency in homes as well, Tony.
All right. Thank you so much, Jonathan. At a time where the federal government is really changing its stance on climate change, this is very important. Thanks for your reporting.
Yeah.